Morning, everybody. If you're new here to the meeting place, my name is John. If you're new here to the meeting place, welcome here. I'm John. I'm part of the pastoral team, and we're in week 2 of a series called Truth Bombs. And I don't know if anybody's ever dropped a truth bomb into your life. It usually happens at an inconvenient time. It often happens in an inconvenient way, and it's often saying inconvenient things. And very often, these things kind of explode our circumstances. It causes us to stop everything and reconsider. Paul, the apostle, is writing a letter to the church in a city called Corinth. We call that letter in the Bible Corinthians. First, there's 2 of them, 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians. And these words that he writes, it's like every other paragraph, he drops this truth bomb into the life of the Corinthians. These words that kind of blow everything up. Now, the church in Corinth is one, as we will discover in the next few weeks and months, because we're going to go through this in a number of different series, is a church that's deeply divided. They're deeply divided on social lines. Economically, they're deeply divided. Religiously, they come from very, very different backgrounds, and they have a hard time saying, yeah, that's my experience too, because it's not. There's a city called Corinth is largely a newly economically prosperous city. It's a historic pagan center with many, many famous temples. But now it's a city revitalized because many of the freed slaves in the empire or who have been able to buy their freedom, have gone here and they're prosperous. So there's new money. And wherever there's new money, people spend it in lots of crazy ways. And it makes life crazy inside the church. And so Paul drops this truth bomb into a community that's badly divided and says, I need to just say something. For all of you who are Jewish, and that's a good chunk of the church because the Jews had spread around the empire, he said, the story of the cross is a stumbling block for you. And for all of you who are Greeks, the story of the cross is foolishness to you. And you are living out your convictions in so many ways. What's more, the way you're sharing your story isn't particularly interesting or attractive to those around you. The way you're living this story as a church doesn't bring Jesus a good reputation. It's not a good credit to his message. And so today we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the cross. A good friend of ours, she's a teacher, and September is for students what it also is for teachers, a lot of new relationships. And she had a new teacher. She previously sort of had her department and had it all figured out, and there was a big movement in the division, and all of a sudden she had these new teachers in her team, and so she's trying to get to know them, and they're sharing stories like who's that and the pictures on the desk, that sort of thing. And one day at lunch hour, she says to one of her colleagues, she says, oh, I see you're wearing a cross. And she had a cross on a necklace. And she says, is that important to you? And I go, oh no, I was just looking for the least offensive piece of jewelry that I had. Now, Tiffany has never been short of words. But she was like, what do I say? Because for her, as a follower of Jesus, this was something that held together and described all of her faith in a symbol. Tiffany also wore a cross, but it was filled with meaning. It wasn't the least offensive jewelry that she had. I have another friend who she got a call from somebody who could have been her son and was often in her home, and this guy says, so I've decided to get a tattoo. And he texted her a picture. What do you think? It wasn't this particular picture. And she says, well, it's nice. He said, what do you think my mom will think? About the cross or about the tattoo? Well, the cross, that is a tattoo. I think she'll be fine with the cross. I'm not so sure about the tattoo. Now, the tattoo was not the little picture that you get in the text about that big. In the end, it filled all of his right shoulder blade and more. And it was pretty large. And the question was, how long will it take before mom notices that there's a large piece of ink on his back. The cross is everywhere in tattoos. People who have no particular convictions about who Jesus is wear it because it's become a symbol of art in our culture, a kind of description of things that are happening. But there's no personal commitments necessarily made to it. And then, of course, if you want to really reduce the level of commitment, you can go to Forever 21 and get a t-shirt that looks an awful lot like this. It's disposable fashion. And disposable fashion with something that has a symbol that in people's minds has also in some ways become so everywhere that they also in their minds treat it as somewhat disposable. Let me ask you a question. What does the cross mean for you? Is it something that is the least offensive piece of jewelry you have, or something that you're wondering what kind of reaction it will get from your mom? Or is it, in fact, even disposable? You see, the cross is everywhere. The cross we find on hospitals. Hotel Dieu. The early hotels in France, the hospitals in France were called Hotel Dieu, the hospice of God. The place that you would go to have your soul and body tended for. And that was called that because from the earliest days, Christians said, we serve a God who calls us to do things that no one else will do. And people would not take care of the sick because they were scared of communicable diseases. And so the sick would literally become the outcasts. And it was followers of Jesus that created home and place and tended to them. Hotel Dieu, the hospice of God. The hotel of God, the hospital. And the cross is this symbol where people who have no particular faith will go and people who have no particular faith will also serve. And we serve under the cross. What does the cross mean for you? We got a Hotel Dieu for you. Infectious, communicable, sneezing. What is the place of the cross in our lives? Paul says the cross is foolishness and a stumbling block. So let's take a look at Corinthians. If you'd like a Bible, put your hands up. The ushers would gladly get you one of our house Bibles. And let's take a look at some of the words that we find here in 1 Corinthians. Paul says this, starting in verse 22. This is a truth bomb in their circumstances. He says, Jews demand a sign. I'm looking for a display of power. I'm looking for evidence that's irrefutable. Jews demand a sign. And Greeks look for wisdom. I want to know the logic. I want to know the rationale. Does it hold together intellectually for me? But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. Here's this incredible declaration that what Jesus did on the cross is, in fact, an answer, but it's not an answer that everybody wants. It's not an answer that everybody is willing to receive. And so I would ask you the question, why would the cross be a stumbling block in the circle of people that you're connected to? If the cross is a stumbling block to Jews because of their belief system, and I'll explain that in a moment, and to Greeks because of their philosophy, why would the cross be a stumbling block? Why would Jesus' death and resurrection be a stumbling block in your circle of friendship, with your colleagues, with your fellow students, in your family? And maybe why was it a stumbling block for you way back, or just recently when you decided, okay, I need to reckon with some things. You see, I had to reckon with some things when I was 19, and there's a whole series of events in my life in that year that upended my world. One of those things was when somebody dropped a truth bomb into my circumstances, and he goes, "It's not all about you, John." Has anybody ever said that to you? It's not all about you. It's one of those little truth bombs that says, you're acting like a narcissist. You're being pretty selfish. Your world is now revolving around just what's important to you, and you're not paying attention to what's going on in other people's lives, and it matters. Has anybody ever dropped that truth bomb into your life? Have you ever said that to somebody? I said it to Rose once. It didn't go well. Dropping truth bombs into your wife's life, careful. But it's not about you. And in that season of life, about 4 or 5 people, over a period of few months, spoke things to me. And towards the end of a season of pretty profound stress and distress, I find myself in a room that was much like this one. There was a cross. It wasn't a wooden cross, it was a metal cross, and it wasn't there, it was there. And I, looking at the cross, realized that I had a problem with Jesus. And I was not wanting his claims on my life to be true, because if they were true, then everything needed to change. You see, if the claims of Jesus were true, everything in my life needed to change, because right now my life was revolving around me. But the cross, as a truth bomb that lands in our lives, says, you are not the center of the world. And your mission in life is not that important. You see, Jesus is the center, and you are invited to be part of what he wants to do in our world. Let me tell you a little bit about why Jews and Greeks had a problem with the cross. And this might help open our eyes to why you and I and others around us will sometimes have a problem with the cross. The Jews had, in the Hebrew scriptures, there was a verse that said, "Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree." Cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. They could not imagine their God being that. What's more, you are either a Messiah or you are crucified, but you are not both. You are not the coming king rescuing everyone from distress and disaster and crucified. You're one or the other, but you're not both. It does not make sense. And the Jews, looking for a display of power, got instead a God who was willing to sacrifice himself. And it blew their minds, it destroyed their categories, and for many of them, they would say, I've heard about the miracles, I've seen some of them myself, but this is too much. We like Jesus as a miracle worker. We like Jesus as a storyteller and a teacher, but this is too much, because if this is true, that means that everything else that he asks of me, the answer is yes. If this is true and I respond, anything else that he directs me towards, the answer is yes. And the narcissist in me, the selfish person in me, says later, or maybe, or not now. But the cross makes the answer yes. The Greeks, they had a huge challenge on their hands when they thought about the cross. First of all, they came mostly from pagan religions, where their gods displayed power, and they displayed power by exercising authority over others. And so here's a God who comes not in power, but in gentleness, a God who doesn't win at the battle, but in fact gives his life. But many of the Greeks had walked away from their pagan beliefs, and they had embraced Sophia, who, if she's your girlfriend, she's beautiful. But Sophia is the word wisdom. They had embraced the pursuit of reason and wisdom and the logic of faith. And what happens when you take reason and wisdom and the logic of faith? You begin to make God serve you. Does God measure up to your philosophy? And if God doesn't measure up to your philosophy, then that God can't be your God or one worth following. And so it's foolishness. What are your reasons? What are my reasons for putting the cross off to the side and saying, it's too much, or it's silly, or it's ridiculous, or it's 2,000 years old. Most of my reasons come down to one word, and that is selfishness. That's most of my reasons in one word. You might have a different word, but I'm guessing if you take all of the reasons that you have sometimes set the cross to the side, or those that are around you, and you take a look at it, it'll come down to a word. And if I give you a little bit of time, you'll find that word without me pointing it out. See, the Holy Spirit will surface this thing in our lives and point things out, and that's exactly what Paul does in 1 Corinthians. And so teaching here, he's talking to the Corinthians, and he says this. Just going a few verses earlier, we're going to start at the beginning of the section in verse 17. For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. In other words, no matter how good a talker I am, no matter how convincing I am, that doesn't measure up. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. And then it says, for it is written. Now, any place where it says, for it is written, if you want to become a student of the Bible and unlock what's behind that door, go and find out where it was written. So this is what it says. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. That's a quote that Paul pulls from the prophet Isaiah in the Hebrew Scriptures. And if you go back a few pages to the left into Isaiah, you will discover this is what it says. And it's like these short lines are a key for understanding and unlocking a larger story. And this is what it says in Isaiah chapter 29. These people will come near to me with their mouth. They'll honor me with their lips, but their heart are far from me. Their worship is based on merely human rules they have been taught. Therefore, once more, I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of the wise will perish. The intelligence of the intelligent will vanish. Woe to those who go to great depth to hide their plans from the Lord, who do their works in darkness and think, who sees us? Who will know? This short two lines that Paul uses in the book of Corinthians open up a picture to a larger story where people will be religious, thinking that religiosity will somehow fulfill their spiritual needs and will really closely connect them to God. And the story here is, I'm sorry, when it comes out of your mouth, but it's different in your heart, God sees the gap. And if you're going to rationalize your faith around with rules and with performance and with doing good things and being morally proper, that doesn't measure up. The systems that we have in our world to make us feel spiritually secure are ones that are inadequate. There's another picture of the cross that challenges us, and that's the crucifixion. The picture of the crucifixion is one where God's outstretched arms are also God completely vulnerable to us. Vulnerable to you. What is it that I have done to God? What is it that you have done to God? In the rebellion of our hearts, in our profound spiritual selfishness, or not even spiritual, or just profound selfishness, we have done this to God. This is not the least offensive piece of jewelry or the most disposable shirt. This is the center of a faith that says, now that I have come to serve, I'm going to ask you to serve. Now that I have come to forgive, I'm going to ask you to forgive. Now that I have come to heal, I'm going to ask you to be about healing. Now that I have chosen you, I am going to ask you to also choose others who've done nothing to deserve being chosen. See, the story of the God of the cross is the one who so profoundly changes our circumstances that our answer goes from being me to yes. Our answer becomes yes in Jesus. It's an incredibly powerful thing. You see, the sign of the cross is not the sign of death. It's the sign that death has been defeated. The symbol of the cross is not the symbol of defeat, it's the symbol of victory over the powers. The sign of the cross is one that is filled with meaning, not logic. There was a picture which I couldn't get for this morning. It was of a Roman cartoon. I could get the picture. It doesn't copy really well. In fact, it copied terribly. It was a Roman cartoon about 120, 130 BC, AD. So about 100 years after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. And it was a picture of a man on a cross. The heading above it was, "This is your God," but the head of the man was a donkey. The story is, your God is an ass. And yet, we proclaim Christ crucified. So why did Jesus die? Why did Jesus die for you? Why would Jesus die for me? There are 3 words that are used later in this scripture, which I just want to highlight for you. And I'm not going to go back and read them yet, but I'm just going to tell you that the 3 words are redemption and righteousness and what's the third one? I'm going to read it. We should do this together. It's because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, our holiness, and our redemption. And these 3 words unlock why the cross is so powerful in our experience. The first one is redemption. If the city of Corinth was a city of freedmen, of slaves who had purchased their freedom, redemption is the story of buying out of slavery. We're redeeming something. So this is a story that the Corinthians would have understood very well, that in the cross, Jesus bought us out of slavery. So the question is, what are you enslaved to? The cross buys you out of that slavery. So why are you still suffering under its chains when God has offered you himself as freedom? That's the redemption theme. The righteousness theme is really the theme of religious, of legal language. It's not religious. We think of righteous as a religious word now. But righteous is a forensic word. It's to be made legally right. You have been found in the eyes of the court not guilty. Let me ask you the question, what do you feel guilty about? What do you feel that it so destroys your life that you can never walk around without shame and guilt being all over you? The cross says you're innocent because Jesus has taken the sentence. The conviction was handed down, and Jesus said, I will bear the sentence so that you don't have to. And then the last word is holiness. This is a religious word. But holiness is not a holier than thou-ness. It's a holy for something. God is setting you apart for a great purpose. This is about spiritual purpose and mission in life. And this is what the cross does. It buys you out of your slavery. It declares that you are innocent and Jesus has borne your guilt in your place. And it sets you apart for some great purpose. So what is the place of the cross in your life? The reason this is so important right at the beginning for Paul is that things are going to get real messy in the next 16 chapters. We're going to deal with all sorts of cultural problems. We're going to deal with all sorts of tensions and disasters in the church. We're going to deal with sin at its most horrifying level, and we're going to deal with selfishness. We're going to deal with a community that is falling apart. And if the cross is central, the answer is yes. We will follow. But if the cross isn't central, then we will make of community what we always make of community. And we will make of our lives what we always make of our lives. And it will be our own to bear.
Okay, Thanks, John. We got a lot of questions here. I don't think that we're going to get through all of them. But let's start with this. Clinging to the cross. Is clinging to the cross the right perspective? Isn't that clinging to a symbol rather than the person of Jesus Christ?
Yes. The cross is a symbol that carries meaning. Symbols carry meaning. And people who wear a cross without meaning, that's the story that I started, the least offensive piece of jewelry that I have. When people don't recognize that symbols carry meaning, they're missing something. So when we do have something that so powerfully organizes all of our thinking about what Jesus did and what Jesus still wants to do, it's something that is central to our lives. So if you want to say clinging is different, the cross should send us out on mission, or the cross should cause us to be really committed to what Jesus wants to do in this world in various ways. Yes, but at the center of it is we have to recognize what role the cross, Jesus' death and resurrection, actually plays in our life. Otherwise, mission or going out and doing stuff can just actually be religious busyness or satisfying my sense of moral contribution when making this difference in the world that all humans should make, but it's not actually because of Jesus anymore. So I would say clinging is actually a pretty important thing. When do we recognize that we've been saved from something and say, I don't ever want to let that go. I don't ever want that to become secondary.
Okay, so going off of that, you told some stories about some conversations earlier on in your talk. And so in those scenarios, I may take the liberty of rewording this question. So the question says, did those friends use their opportunities to share what the cross means to them? So that's a yes or no question. Did they share? I'm going to take the liberty of changing it. How could they have used that opportunity to share about Jesus?
Yeah, because I actually don't know what they did with it other than what they reported to me. I'll start with the first story I told of Tiffany, who had a conversation with her teaching colleague, the most inoffensive piece of jewelry. I know in that case, she was so startled by something that meant so much to her and so little to somebody else that she said she was speechless. But at the end of the day, she still needed to talk it out. But I do know what Tiffany's life is like. And I think this is the other piece, is she deliberately looks for opportunities for conversation all the time. It was the reason why she said, oh, you have a cross. She was looking for an opportunity for conversation. And I would say one of the things that we can do is say, where do we look for opportunities for conversation? Not just about the cross, but all things that symbolize belief and meaning. There's people who will regularly wear religious iconography. It might be a Buddha on a t-shirt. What does that mean to you? It's the simple curiosity question. And in learning those things, we might find that it has deep meaning or it has no meaning. And all of a sudden we're able to create a spiritual conversation. And the other way of doing it, which I know one person has done, is not asking the question, what does it mean? It's like, just be excited about what it means. It's like, oh, you got a new tattoo, and it's this cross. It's like, this is what that means to me. And share your own sense of passion for what Jesus is doing in your life. Very often, we are not curious. On the other side of it, very often we don't offer our passions. And I would say those are two things in conversations. Engage in curiosity, but then offer your passions, saying, be available. Because of this, I've done this and been part of that, and you should, and could you want to come with me? And that kind of passion is very often incredibly attractive.
Thanks for sharing, John.
Thank you.
We've got some questions. So let's start with this one. Do you think that truth bombs are harder today where it seems like people don't want truth from a Christian?
I don't know that people want truth as it pertains to them generally. Like, if somebody's going to drop a truth bomb, it usually means that I'm being challenged, I'm being called out, I'm having motives or actions somehow exposed or revealed. So I don't know that it's a Christian thing. I think it's a culture thing. The other thing is, I think we learn to tune them out because of social media, where it's just like everybody they lob them out there. Right. And so we tune it out. But let's say two things. Christians haven't had a great reputation in two ways. One is being judgmental. And so when we put out something, motive really matters. And we as a community around the world have not done a great job of communicating truth in love. We've communicated truth in judgment quite often. And we were never asked to. It says in the Bible that we're supposed to judge each other, like that's inside the family, hold each other accountable. It's all there. But when it comes to speaking truth in our world, it's supposed to be truth and love. Well, it's supposed to be truth and love internally too, but it's clearly supposed to be truth and love as we reach a world and connect with a world that doesn't have a relationship with Jesus.
Right. So on that note, next question. The cross is a central part of my life, but I freeze up when people ask me about my faith. How can I get better at sharing the good news that I know to be true?
Share the good news. What's good news for you? I think that's one of the big things. Even as I was teaching, there were certain points where I would say something and somebody's face lit up. I can see you well enough in the light to know that something happened right in that moment. I don't know what it was, but there was clearly a good news moment for some people as I was talking. Whatever that good news in your relationship with Jesus is, be excited about it. I'm a Packers fan. 12 o'clock is a game. I will yell and cheer, and I'm going to really enjoy a game because I'm excited about it. Myron's over here. He's wearing a Packers shirt. He's willing to represent. What are we willing to represent on in a way that's just passionate and excited about? And I would say in your relationship with Jesus, there is something that has been life-changing for you. You don't have to know everything. You just have to share that thing.
Thank you. So that speaks to those of us that have had a life-changing relationship with Jesus. But what about people that aren't there yet? Why is it so hard to let the cross and Jesus be central in my life?
Because the cross is one of those things that takes you out of the center. I think at a pretty basic level, from the time we're toddlers on for sure, there's a little or a large narcissist in most of us where we want to be the center. Our insecurities tell us that we want to be the center and we don't feel we're center enough. Our arrogance tells us that we believe we're the center and we should be the center not just of my life but of your life too. The cross says that I'm not the center anymore, and I think that's a hard thing for most every person. The question is, do you want Jesus at the center? Is Jesus good news? Will Jesus' actions bring you healing? Will the joy, it's described in the Bible as the joy of salvation. Will God saving you, in fact, bring you deep joy? Many people are skeptical about those things, and so they stand far off. And we've given lots of reason in our world to be skeptical about lots of things. And sometimes the cross is one of them. And so then the question is, would I really consider it for myself? Not is it good for somebody else, but is it good now for me? So,
Thanks, John.
thank you. I want to invite you to stand, and I want to send you with a blessing. You are redeemed. You have been bought out of slavery by the Jesus of the cross. Go and live a redeemed life and be busy about partnering with Jesus to redeem others, because there's so much slavery in our world. You are righteous. Jesus has said, I will carry the guilt so you can be free. Go in freedom. The judgment has passed and you are set free. Go and free others. And you have been made holy. God has given us all, you in particular, a purpose because of Jesus. Go and live that purpose out this week. Have a great week. If there's anything that's been said or sung today and you need to talk to somebody, come on up to the front. We would love to speak with you, to pray with you, to encourage you on your journey. Have a good week.